My name is Victoria. I am 32 years old and I am the silent founder of Vantage Capital. For 5 years I have played the role of the submissive housewife to protect my husband's fragile ego. But last night, the curtain finally fell. At my birthday party, my mother-in-law whispered something in my husband's ear, and I saw the shift in his eyes before I could react. The next moment, his slap sent me crashing to the floor. Stunned, I lay there as he turned to walk away until a slow chuckle escaped my lips. He froze, his face drained of color. The silence that descended upon the grand ballroom was heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above us. The string quartet had stopped playing abruptly, leaving only the sound of the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Hamptons estate. I could taste the metallic tang of blood pooling in the corner of my mouth. The left side of my face throbbed with a heat that spread quickly to my ear, but strangely, the physical pain felt distant. It was as if I was watching the scene from a surveillance camera high above rather than lying on the cold marble floor in my custom silk gown. Julian, my husband of 5 years, stood over me breathing heavily. His hand, the one that had just struck me, was trembling by his side. It was not trembling from regret. It was trembling from the adrenaline of finally exerting the dominance he had always craved but never earned. He looked around the room, his eyes darting frantically between the faces of our guests. These were not just friends. These were his business partners, his potential investors, and the elite of New York society. He needed to justify his violence. He needed to make this my fault. "You made me do that!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "You just had to embarrass my mother, didn't you? You just had to sit there with that smug look on your face while she was trying to give a toast. You disrespectful, ungrateful woman." I did not move immediately. I stayed on the floor, letting the murmurs of the crowd wash over me. I could hear the gasps of the wives and the uncomfortable clearing of throats from the husbands. But I also saw something else. I saw his mother, Patricia, standing just behind his right shoulder. She was not shocked. She was not horrified. She was smiling. It was a tight, victorious smile that she tried to hide behind a lace handkerchief, but I saw it. She had whispered the poison, and Julian, like the obedient puppet he was, had executed the strike. Slowly, I placed my palms flat against the cold stone. I pushed myself up. I did not rush. I moved with a deliberate, terrifying slowness. I smoothed the skirt of my emerald green dress, ensuring the fabric fell perfectly over my heels. I reached up and wiped the trickle of blood from my lip with the back of my hand, examining the crimson stain for a moment before looking up. When I finally locked eyes with Julian, the room seemed to drop in temperature. He took an involuntary step back. He was expecting tears. He was expecting me to run out of the room sobbing or to scream insults. He was expecting the reaction of a broken woman. But I was not broken. I was calculating. "That was the most expensive mistake of your life, Julian," I said softly, my voice steady and clear enough for every person in the room to hear. "I mean that literally." He blinked, confused by my tone. He puffed out his chest, trying to regain his composure in front of the crowd. "Don't you dare threaten me, Victoria," he scoffed, glancing at his mother for reassurance. "You are nothing without me. You live in my house, you spend my money, and you wear the clothes I pay for. If you don't like how I discipline you, then you can get out." I felt that bubble of laughter rising in my throat again. The irony was so rich it was almost suffocating. My eyes drifted to the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. He believed it was a bonus from the board of directors for his performance last quarter. He had no idea that I was the chairman of the board, and I had authorized that bonus solely so he could pay off his gambling debts without feeling emasculated. I looked at the tuxedo he was wearing, tailored from the finest Italian wool. I had paid the tailor directly from a private account he didn't know existed. I looked around the sprawling ballroom of the Hamptons mansion. The deed to this house was in a blind trust. He thought the trust belonged to his family's estate. He was wrong. It belonged to Vantage Capital. It belonged to me. For years I had constructed an elaborate stage play for him. I knew Julian's ego was as fragile as glass. He needed to feel like the provider, the alpha male, the king of his castle. Because I loved him, or thought I did, I used my vast resources to prop up his fantasy. I hired headhunters to recruit him for jobs I secretly created. I funneled deals to his department so he would get the commissions. I let him believe his mediocre salary covered our jet-setting lifestyle, while I quietly paid 90% of the bills from the shadows. I had made myself small so he could feel big. I had dimmed my light so he could shine. And this was my reward, a slap in the face in front of 200 people on my 32nd birthday. The realization hit me with more force than his hand had. I had not just married a weak man, I had married a parasite. And parasites do not respect the host they feed on, they resent it. Patricia stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She placed a protective hand on Julian's arm and glared at me with pure venom. "Stop acting like a victim, Victoria." She spat, her voice dripping with disdain. "You brought this on yourself. A wife's duty is to support her husband and produce an heir, not to prance around like a barren show pony. My son deserves better. He deserves a real woman, not a cold, defective statue like you." The insults about my fertility were her favorite weapon. She knew we had been trying for 3 years without success. She loved to twist that knife whenever she could. Usually I would look down ashamed. Usually I would apologize for being inadequate. But tonight, the shame was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "Is that so, Patricia?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "You think Julian deserves better?" "I do," she declared, lifting her chin, "and thankfully, he has finally realized it too. We were going to wait until after the party to tell you, because we have some manners unlike you. But since you have decided to ruin the evening with your attitude, we might as well do it now." She snapped her fingers towards the double doors at the back of the room. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the crowd parted. A hush fell over the room again, but this time it was different. This was the silence of scandal. Walking through the doors was a young woman I recognized immediately. Jessica. She was Julian's personal assistant. She was 22 years old with wide, innocent eyes and blonde hair that she constantly twirled around her finger. But what drew everyone's attention was not her face. It was her hand resting protectively over a very visible baby bump. She was wearing a tight white dress that accentuated her pregnancy, leaving nothing to the imagination. Julian's face flushed a deep crimson, but he didn't look ashamed. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who was finally done hiding. He reached out his hand, and Jessica walked over to him, slotting herself under his arm as if she belonged there. Patricia beamed, clapping her hands together delightfully. "Everyone, I would like to introduce you to the future of this family," she announced, her voice booming with pride. "This is Jessica, and she is carrying the grandson I have been praying for. She is a real woman, a woman who knows her place and knows how to give a man what he truly needs." The guests were paralyzed. Some looked at me with pity, others with morbid curiosity, waiting to see if I would collapse. A husband slapping his wife was bad enough, but bringing his pregnant mistress to her birthday party to replace her. This was social execution. This was designed to destroy me completely. Julian looked at me, his confidence returning now that he had his mother and his mistress by his side. "I'm leaving you, Victoria," he said, his voice gaining strength. "I'm filing for divorce in the morning. I'm taking the house. I'm taking the cars. And since you have no income and no job, you will get nothing. Jessica and I are going to raise my son here in this house where he belongs. You have 1 hour to pack your bags and get out." He smirked, waiting for me to beg. He wanted me to fall to my knees. He wanted me to plead for him to let me stay. He wanted to see me broken so he could feel powerful one last time. But I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I simply checked the time on my diamond-encrusted watch. It was 8:45 in the evening. The banks were closed. The lawyers were at home with their families. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I was helpless. I looked at Jessica, who was smirking at me, rubbing her belly in a performative display of victory. I looked at Patricia, who was already signaling the waiters to bring more champagne to toast her new daughter-in-law. And finally I looked at Julian, the man I had built from nothing, the man who just tried to discard me like trash. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea that the ground they were standing on was rigged with explosives, and I was holding the detonator. Before I tell you how I turned their celebration into a funeral for their finances, please hit that subscribe button if you believe that betrayal should always come with a heavy price tag. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and betrayal. I reached into my clutch, not for a tissue, but for my phone. I saw the fear flicker in Julian's eyes for a second. He thought I was calling the police, but I had someone much more dangerous on speed dial. "You are right, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a verdict. "You should enjoy this moment. Celebrate your new life. Celebrate your son. Because in exactly 10 minutes, you're going to learn the difference between being a rich man and being a man who is kept by a rich woman." I tapped the screen 3 times, sending a single pre-coded signal to my head of security and my chief legal officer. The code was Omega. It meant scorched earth. It meant total asset freeze. It meant the immediate termination of all employment contracts and the revocation of all privileges. Julian laughed, shaking his head. "You are pathetic, Victoria. Who are you texting?" "Your therapist. Go pack your bags before I have security throw you out." I smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, a smile of pure anticipation. "I don't need to pack, Julian," I said, turning my back on him and walking towards the exit, "because everything in this house belongs to me, and the security guards you are threatening me with." I signed their paychecks. As I walked away, leaving a stunned silence in my wake, I counted down in my head. 3, 2, 1. Suddenly the music cut out completely. The lights in the ballroom flickered and then died, plunging the party into semi-darkness. The emergency backup generator hummed to life, casting a ghostly red glow over the terrified guests. And then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. The transfer was complete. The joint accounts were empty. The credit cards were dead. I paused at the doorway, looking back at the chaotic scene. Julian was frantically tapping his phone, his face pale. Patricia was screaming at a waiter. Jessica looked uncertain, her hand trembling on her stomach. This was just the beginning. By tomorrow morning, they wouldn't just be homeless. They would be hunting for crumbs. And I would be watching from my penthouse in Manhattan, laughing exactly the way I did when he slapped me. Because he didn't slap a housewife. He slapped the CEO of the company that owns his entire life. The heavy oak doors of the manor groaned as I pushed them open, meeting the wall of rain that was battering the Hamptons coastline. The cold air felt like a cleansing wave against my heated skin, washing away the suffocating perfume of the ballroom. But before I could take a step toward the driveway, a hand clamped down hard on my shoulder, spinning me around. It was Julian. His face was twisted in a snarl that distorted his handsome features into something ugly and unrecognizable. Behind him, the red emergency lights of the foyer cast long, demonic shadows against the walls, making him look less like a husband and more like a desperate animal cornered in a trap he didn't understand. "Where do you think you are going with my property, Victoria?" he hissed, tightening his grip on my arm. "You don't get to just walk away with the keys to my car and the cards from my bank account. You came into this marriage with nothing, and by God, you are leaving with nothing." I looked down at his hand on my silk sleeve, then up at his eyes. The sheer delusion was fascinating. He genuinely believed the narrative he had spun for himself. In his mind, he was the tycoon, the provider, the generous benefactor who had rescued me from obscurity. He had conveniently forgotten that the black Aston Martin DB11 parked in the driveway was purchased with a check from a shell company I controlled. He had forgotten that the Centurion card in my wallet was a supplementary card linked to my primary account, not the other way around. Handed over, he demanded, holding out a shaking hand. "The keys, the credit cards, the jewelry. That necklace is a family heirloom." It wasn't. I had bought the diamond pendant at an auction in Geneva 3 years ago and told him it was from his grandmother so he wouldn't feel inadequate about not being able to afford my birthday gift. But I didn't correct him. I simply stared at him with that same eerie calm that had silenced the ballroom moments ago. "You want the keys, Julian?" I asked, my voice low and devoid of emotion. I reached into my clutch. Suddenly, a blur of pink chiffon launched itself at me. It was Candace, Julian's younger sister. She had always hated me mostly because I refused to let her treat our home like a hotel and my wardrobe like a free boutique. She clawed at my purse, her long fake nails digging into the leather. "Give it to him, you leech!" Candace shrieked, her face flushed with the alcohol she had been consuming since noon. "You think you can just steal from my brother and run off to your trashy little life? That bag probably costs more than your parents made in a year. Give it here." She yanked hard on the strap, trying to rip the clutch from my grasp. The physical violation was shocking. These people who prided themselves on etiquette and high society breeding were behaving like scavengers fighting over a carcass. I didn't pull back. I simply held my ground, letting her struggle against my grip, watching her embarrass herself. "Candace, stop it!" A deep voice boomed from the shadows of the hallway. Strong hands grabbed Candace by the waist and hauled her back. It was Marcus, her husband. Marcus was the outlier in this family, a brilliant corporate attorney who had clawed his way up from poverty. He was the only person in the room who understood how the world actually worked. While the rest of them lived in a fantasy bubble of inherited status, Marcus dealt in contracts, clauses, and liabilities. He held his struggling wife firmly, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a mixture of apology and intense calculation. He wasn't looking at me like a victim. He was looking at me like a puzzle he had just solved. "Let her go, Marcus," Candace screamed, thrashing in his arms. "She has Julian's cards. She's stealing family money." "Shut up, Candace," Marcus whispered, his voice sharp and urgent. He leaned in close to her ear, though in the quiet of the foyer I heard every word. "You are making a mistake. Look at her. Look at how she is standing. She isn't afraid." "So what? She's in shock because we finally kicked her out," Candace spat back, trying to break free. "No," Marcus insisted, tightening his grip. "You don't understand. I have been looking at the tax filings you left on the desk last week. The structure of the assets. It's complex, too complex for Julian. We don't know whose name is actually on the deed to this house. We don't know whose name is on those accounts. If you touch her, if you take that bag by force, that is assault and robbery. If she owns what I think she owns, she will bury us." I felt a flicker of respect for Marcus. He was the only one with survival instincts. He had sensed the shift in power dynamics even before the lights went out. He realized that the quiet wife who sat in the corner reading financial reports might not be the simpleton they treated her as, but Candace was too blinded by jealousy and entitlement to hear reason. She shoved Marcus away with a grunt of disgust. "You are such a coward, Marcus," she sneered, smoothing her dress. "This is why my mother says you never truly fit in. You are always so afraid of authority. This is my family's house, my family's money, and she is just a squatter." She turned back to me, her eyes blazing with triumph. "Julian, take them. Take everything. Let her walk home in the rain." Julian stepped forward, emboldened by his sister's venom. He snatched the clutch from my hand. I let it go instantly. He fumbled through it, his fingers shaking as he pulled out the heavy platinum key fob to the Aston Martin and the black titanium credit card. He held them up to the light like trophies. "Got you." He laughed, a cruel, breathless sound. "You thought you could outsmart me? You are nothing without this card. You can't even buy a sandwich without me." I watched him with a pity that bordered on amusement. He was holding a piece of plastic that had been deactivated exactly 3 minutes ago. He was holding a key to a car that I could disable remotely from my phone. He was celebrating a victory that was actually a trap. "Is that all, Julian?" I asked, adjusting my shawl against the chill. "Get out of my sight," he sneered, tossing my now empty clutch onto the wet floor of the porch. "And don't expect a settlement. I'll make sure the lawyers leave you with debt, not alimony." I bent down and picked up my bag, dusting off a speck of dirt. I looked at Marcus, who was standing back, watching me with a look of dawning horror. He knew. He didn't know the full extent yet, but he knew they had just crossed a line from which there was no return. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said softly. "I suggest you check the Cayman accounts, tonight." Then I turned my eyes to Julian and Candace one last time. They stood there framed by the grand doorway of the mansion, smug and self-satisfied, clutching the symbols of wealth they hadn't earned. "Enjoy the ride, Julian," I said. I turned and walked out into the rain. I didn't run. I walked with the rhythm of a woman who knew that the storm wasn't happening to her. She was the storm. Behind me I heard Julian laughing, the sound echoing in the night. "Look at her," he shouted to his sister, walking in the rain like a stray dog. I reached into my pocket where I'd kept my phone, the one thing he hadn't thought to take, because he assumed it was on his plan. It wasn't. It was an encrypted satellite phone. As I reached the main gate, a black limousine pulled up silently from the darkness, its headlights cutting through the rain. The driver, my head of security, stepped out with an umbrella before I could get wet. "To the airfield, ma'am," he asked, opening the door. I glanced back at the house one last time. The emergency lights were flickering. The heating system would be shutting down in 5 minutes. The smart locks would seal the pantry and the wine cellar in 10. "No," I said, sliding into the warm leather interior. "Take me to the office. The board meeting is in 4 hours. And activate the foreclosure notice on the estate. I want it delivered by drone at sunrise." As the car pulled away, leaving my husband and his family celebrating their hollow victory in a house that was already dying around them, I finally allowed myself to relax. The eviction wasn't just physical. I had just evicted them from reality. And when they woke up, the real world was going to be a very cold place. Before I could fully turn away toward the waiting limousine, Julian stepped into my path one last time, blocking my exit. The rain was beginning to soak through the shoulders of his tuxedo, but he didn't seem to notice. He was vibrating with a manic energy, his eyes wide with a mixture of cruelty and excitement. He wasn't satisfied with just taking my car keys or humiliating me in front of his family. He needed to deliver a final, crushing blow. He needed to make sure I understood exactly how insignificant I was in his grand new world. "You still don't get it, do you, Victoria?" he sneered, wiping rain from his forehead. "You think I am leaving you just because of Jessica. You think this is just about love or a younger woman. You are so small-minded. This is about power. Real power, something a housewife like you could never comprehend." I paused, my hand hovering over the door handle of the car. I decided to indulge him for one more minute. I wanted to hear the extent of his delusion. I wanted to record it in my memory so I could replay it later when I was signing his termination papers. "What are you talking about, Julian?" I asked, my voice flat. He puffed out his chest, standing tall against the storm. "Tomorrow morning everything changes," he announced, his voice booming over the sound of the thunder. "I am not just a director of sales anymore. The board has finally recognized my genius. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning, I am being appointed as the new CEO of Vantage Capital." For the first time all evening, my mask of indifference slipped. My right eyebrow arched upward in a genuine, involuntary reaction of shock. "Vantage Capital." I repeated the name, rolling off my tongue. "You are going to be the CEO of Vantage Capital." "Yes," he laughed, seeing my reaction and mistaking it for awe. "I can see you are surprised." "You should be. It is one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in New York. We manage billions. We control the destiny of tech giants and pharmaceutical startups. And starting tomorrow, I run it all. I don't need a useless wife like you dragging me down anymore. I need a partner who fits the image of a CEO. Jessica fits that image. You fit the image of a tragic past." I stared at him, and for a moment time seemed to suspend. The irony was so potent it was almost dizzying. Julian thought he was impressing me. He thought he was crushing me with his success. He had absolutely no idea that he was bragging about stealing my own company to my face. Vantage Capital was not just a company to me. It was my life's work. I had founded it 7 years ago under a pseudonym, using the inheritance my grandmother had left me in a blind trust. I named it Vantage because I always wanted to have the higher ground. I had built it brick by brick, deal by deal, staying in the shadows, while I hired charismatic men to sit in the public-facing seats. I did this because I knew that in the cutthroat world of high finance, a mysterious board of directors was more intimidating than a 32-year-old woman. Julian had been a mid-level manager at a failing logistics firm when we met. When we got married, I felt sorry for his stagnation. I saw how desperate he was to feel important, so I pulled some strings. I created a vacancy at Vantage. I instructed my proxy CEO, Jonathan, to hire Julian as a sales director. I gave him a bloated salary, a corner office, and an easy portfolio so he could feel successful. I essentially created an adult daycare center for my husband within my own empire, just to keep his ego fed. And now he was standing here telling me he was going to run it. The math didn't add up. Jonathan, my proxy CEO, would never step down. The board of directors consisted of me, my attorney, and 2 other shell entities I controlled. There had been no vote. There had been no meeting. So how did Julian think he was becoming CEO? I looked at his face closely. I saw the dilation of his pupils. I saw the arrogant tilt of his chin. And then I looked at the diamond bracelet on Jessica's wrist. I looked at the new Porsche parked in the garage. I remembered the conversation with Marcus about the complex assets. And then it clicked. Embezzlement. It had to be. Julian wasn't being promoted. He had bought his way into a fantasy. He must have been siphoning money from the operational accounts for months, perhaps years, cooking the books to show false profits. He likely used that stolen money to bribe one of the junior partners, or perhaps he had fallen for a scam himself, believing he was buying a majority stake from a third party. He wasn't just an adulterer. He was a criminal. And worse, he was a criminal who had stolen from his own wife to buy a crown made of paper. "You seem quiet," Victoria Julian taunted, leaning in close. "Cat got your tongue. Or are you finally realizing what you lost? I'm going to be a titan of industry, and you are going to be nothing." I looked at him with a new kind of pity. It wasn't the pity you feel for a wounded animal. It was the pity you feel for a man walking off a cliff while convinced he can fly. "You are right, Julian," I said softly, my voice barely audible over the rain. "I am speechless. To be the CEO of Vantage Capital is a massive responsibility. It requires total control of the shareholders. It requires the approval of the chairman." "I have the approval," he interrupted, snapping his fingers. "The deal is done. The papers are ready to be signed tomorrow. I have people on the inside Victoria. People who know real talent when they see it. Not like you. You never believed in me. You always looked at me with those judging eyes. Well, look at me now." "I am looking, Julian," I replied, "and I see exactly what you are. I saw a man who had committed corporate fraud. I saw a man who had likely forged signatures. I saw a man who was walking into a board meeting tomorrow expecting a coronation, but was walking into an indictment. He didn't need me anymore. That was the only truthful thing he had said. He didn't need a wife. He needed a defense attorney." "Go on then," he said, waving his hand dismissively, shooing me away like a stray dog. "Get in your little car and leave. I have a company to run. I have a legacy to build. And Jessica and I have a celebration to finish." He turned his back on me, strutting back toward the warmth of the mansion, toward his mother and his mistress. He walked with the swagger of a billionaire, completely unaware that every step he took was on ground I owned. I watched him go. A dark, cold smile touched my lips. "Enjoy your night as the CEO designate." "Julian," I whispered to the rain, "because tomorrow you meet the chairman." I turned and slid into the back seat of the limousine. The leather was cool, and the air smelled of lemon and polished wood. The silence inside the car was a stark contrast to the storm outside. My head of security looked at me in the rearview mirror, waiting for instructions. "Did you hear that I asked him?" "Every word, ma'am," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. "Good," I said, pulling out my tablet and logging into the Vantage Capital secure server. I typed in my biometric passkey. The screen flashed green, granting me administrative access to the entire mainframe. I navigated to the personnel files. I found Julian's profile. Under his photo, he looked so smug, so confident. Current status active. Position director of sales. I didn't fire him. Not yet. That would be too easy. That would be too merciful. "If he wants to be CEO," I murmured, tapping the screen, "let's give him the full boardroom experience." I opened the calendar for the next day. There was indeed a meeting scheduled for 9 in the morning. It was labeled Strategic Review. Julian had likely scheduled it himself. I adjusted the meeting title. I deleted Strategic Review and typed in a new agenda. Agenda Item 1, Internal Audit and Immediate Termination. Agenda Item 2, Federal Fraud Investigation. I looked at the changes and felt a surge of satisfaction. He wanted to play in the big leagues. He wanted to be a powerful man. Well, he was about to learn the first rule of power. Never steal from the hand that feeds you, especially when that hand is the only thing keeping you out of prison. "Drive," I said to the driver. As the car glided down the long driveway, I didn't look back at the house. I looked at the tablet in my lap, watching the digital footprint of my husband's life begin to crumble one bite at a time. The rain battered the windows trying to get in, but I was safe. I was calm. I was the eye of the storm. and tomorrow the storm would make landfall. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind Julian, sealing him back inside the warmth of the mansion. I was left standing alone on the expansive stone porch, the barrier between the world of false luxury inside and the raw, biting reality of the storm outside. The rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming a relentless rhythm against the slate roof, a sound that usually comforted me, but tonight sounded like a war drum. I did not move immediately. I did not run to my car. I did not cry. I simply stood there under the shelter of the portico and listened to the muffled sounds of celebration leaking through the thick walls. I could hear the faint cheer of the crowd. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses. They were toasting. They were celebrating the future CEO. They were celebrating the pregnancy. They were celebrating the successful excision of the cancerous wife who had held them back. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress, a small slit in the silk seam that no tailor would notice unless they were looking for it. I bypassed the standard smartphone that Julian had mocked earlier. Instead, I pulled out a slender, matte black device. It had no brand name, no camera, and no social media apps. It was the encrypted satellite communicator linked directly to the central server of Vantage Capital's security division. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The screen glowed with a harsh red light scanning my print, and then my retina. A text prompt appeared. Identity confirmed. Chairperson Victoria. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. My fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon making the first incision. I scrolled past the options for audit and surveillance. I went straight to the bottom of the command list to a function I had programmed 3 years ago, hoping I would never have to use it. It was labeled simply Protocol Omega. In the world of high-stakes venture capital, Protocol Omega was the nuclear option. It wasn't just a freeze. It was a complete digital and physical lockdown of all assets linked to the primary beneficiary. It was designed for scenarios where a CEO went rogue or a hostile entity seized control of a subsidiary. It was designed to stop a hemorrhage instantly. I pressed the icon. A confirmation box popped up. Warning, this action is irreversible. It will immediately suspend all credit facilities, revoke all security clearances, and initiate asset recovery procedures. Do you wish to proceed? I looked at the screen. Then I looked up at the house. This wasn't just a house. It was a masterpiece I had curated. I had chosen the limestone for the walls. I had flown to Italy to select the marble for the floors. I had planted the rose bushes that were now being whipped by the wind. I had built this sanctuary for a family I thought I was part of. But looking at it now, I realized it was never a home. It was just a stage, and the actors had finally forgotten their lines. Yes, I whispered. I pressed confirm. The screen flashed once, displaying a timer Protocol Omega active. System shut down in T-10 minutes. The deed was done. The signal was already bouncing off a satellite in orbit, beaming down to the servers in Manhattan and rippling out to every bank credit bureau and security firm in the state. The invisible noose had been tightened. Now all I had to do was wait for them to choke. I slid the phone back into my dress and stepped out from under the portico. The moment my expensive heels hit the wet pavement, the cold rain assaulted me. It soaked through my hair instantly, plastering the silk of my gown to my skin. The wind bit at my bare arms, but I didn't wrap my arms around myself. I didn't hunch my shoulders. I walked tall, letting the water wash over me. It felt cleansing. It felt like the grime of 5 years of lies was finally being rinsed away. I walked slowly down the long, winding driveway. Halfway down, I stopped. I couldn't help myself. I turned around to look at the house one last time. From the darkness of the garden, the mansion looked like a glowing ocean liner sailing through the night. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the ballroom were blazing with golden light, framing the party inside like a movie screen. I was the audience of one, standing in the mud, watching the climax of a tragedy they thought was a comedy. I could see them clearly. Julian was standing on a chair holding a magnum of champagne. He was laughing, his mouth open wide, his face flushed with triumph. He was gesturing to the crowd, likely making a speech about his brilliance, about his new era. Next to him, Patricia was holding court. She was showing off Jessica to a group of my friends, no Julian's friends. I saw Jessica rubbing her belly, feigning modesty while soaking up the attention. They looked so secure. They looked so untouchable in their warm, bright castle. They didn't know that the champagne they were drinking was now technically stolen property. They didn't know that the electricity powering those chandeliers was being billed to an account that had just been closed. They didn't know that the security staff standing at the perimeter were receiving text messages right now, ordering them to stand down and secure the premises against the occupants. I watched Julian raise his glass for a toast. The room erupted in applause. "Cheers to the new king," I said to the wind, my voice dripping with irony. I turned my back on them. The image of their happiness burned into my mind, not as a source of pain, but as fuel. I wanted them to be happy right now. I wanted them to be at the absolute peak of their joy. Because the higher you are, the farther you fall. And the fall wasn't going to happen in months or weeks. It was going to happen tonight. As I reached the iron gates of the estate, the headlights of my extraction vehicle cut through the gloom. It wasn't just a car, it was a mobile command center. The driver, a man named Elias, who had been with me since the start of Vantage, stepped out into the rain. He didn't offer pity. He simply opened the rear door and held out a dry towel. "Status?" I asked, sliding into the leather seat. "Omega is active," Ma'am Elias said, closing the door and shutting out the storm. "The banks have confirmed the freeze, the foreclosure notice has been digitally filed with the county clerk, and the utility company has received the disconnect order for non-payment." "Good," I said, drying my face. "And the severance packages for the household staff, processed and paid with a bonus," Elias confirmed. "They have been instructed to vacate the premises within the hour." I leaned back, watching the rain streak against the tinted glass. Up the hill, the lights of the mansion were still blazing, but they were ghost lights. The people inside just didn't know they were ghosts yet. "Let's go, Elias," I commanded. "Where to, ma'am?" "Take me to the office," I said, my eyes hardening. "I have a board meeting to prepare for." And Elias, "Yes, ma'am. Make sure the drone footage of the eviction is sent directly to my private server. I want to watch it with my morning coffee." As the car pulled away, leaving the estate behind in the darkness, I didn't feel like a woman who had lost her husband. I felt like a CEO who had just liquidated a failing asset. The emotional portfolio was cleared. Now it was time for the hostile takeover. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of piercing cerulean blue that seemed to mock the chaos of the previous night. Monday mornings in New York City have a specific rhythm, a frantic pulse of millions of people chasing dreams or running from nightmares. For the past 5 years, my Mondays had been defined by domestic trivialities. I would usually be coordinating with the housekeeper, reviewing the weekly menu, or ensuring Julian's shirts were starched to his exact specifications. I played the role of the supporting character in his life, making sure his path was smooth and his ego was polished. But today was different. Today, I was not a wife. I was not a victim. I was the executioner. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my penthouse dressing room. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable from the person who had been slapped to the floor 12 hours ago. The bruises on my cheek had been expertly concealed, but the steel in my eyes could not be hidden. I reached for the suit I had commissioned from a bespoke tailor in Savile Row, a structured white blazer with sharp lapels and matching wide-leg trousers. It was an outfit that screamed authority. It was armor. As I fastened the gold buttons, I felt a physical transformation. The submissive posture I had adopted to make Julian feel tall evaporated. My spine straightened. My chin lifted. I applied a layer of crimson lipstick, a shade I had avoided, because Julian said it made me look too aggressive. Today, aggressive was exactly what I needed. My phone buzzed on the marble vanity. It was a notification from my head of security. The extraction of the hostile elements from the Hamptons estate was successful. The locks have been changed. The assets are secured. I didn't smile. I simply swiped the notification away and picked up my briefcase. Inside was not a lunch for my husband, but the legal instruments that would dismantle his life. The ride to the financial district was silent. My driver navigated the morning traffic with the precision of a pilot while I reviewed the agenda on my tablet. When the black SUV pulled up to the curb of the Vantage Capitol Tower, I took a deep breath. This building was my cathedral. I had purchased the land when everyone else said the market was crashing. I had approved the architectural blueprints that designed the jagged glass facade to look like a shard of ice piercing the sky. To the world, I was a ghost. To the employees inside, I was a myth. But today, the myth was becoming flesh. The moment my heels struck the polished granite of the lobby, the atmosphere shifted. The security guards at the front desk, men who usually offered a casual nod to visitors, straightened their backs and snapped to attention. They knew. They had received the briefing at 6 a.m. "Good morning, Madam Chairman," the head of lobby security said, his voice hushed and respectful. He pressed the button to override the turnstiles before I even reached them. I nodded, acknowledging him without breaking stride. The lobby was bustling with young analysts and ambitious traders clutching their coffees, running toward the elevators. They parted for me like the Red Sea, not because they knew my face, but because they sensed the aura of absolute power radiating from me. They whispered as I passed, wondering who the woman in the white suit was, and why the building manager was running ahead of her to summon the private executive elevator. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was smooth and silent. I watched the numbers climb, leaving the noise of the city far below. With every floor, I felt the last remnants of Victoria the housewife shedding away, leaving only Victoria the founder. When the doors slid open, I was greeted by the hushed reverence of the executive floor. The carpet here was plush, absorbing the sound of footsteps. The walls were lined with modern art that I had personally curated. My executive assistant, a sharp woman named Elena, who had been managing my schedule remotely for years, stood up from her desk immediately. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and terrifying efficiency. "The legal team is waiting in the boardroom, madame," she said, handing me a fresh espresso in a porcelain cup. "And the forensic accounting team has finished their preliminary audit. It is worse than we thought." I took the coffee, my expression unchanging. "How much worse?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second. "The unauthorized withdrawals are significant, and the beneficiaries are personal." "Show me," I said, walking past her toward the double glass doors of the main conference room. Inside the room, the air was thick with tension. 4 men and 2 women in dark suits stood up in unison as I entered. These were the sharks I paid to protect my empire. Anderson, my general counsel, a man who could find a loophole in the 10 Commandments if he had to, sat at the head of the table. Next to him was Sarah, the head of forensic accounting, her face illuminated by the glow of 3 laptops and a projector screen. "Please sit," I commanded, taking the seat at the head of the table. The chair was high-backed leather, designed for long negotiations. It felt like a throne. Anderson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Victoria, we have compiled the data you requested last night. We ran a deep dive into the operational accounts managed by Julian's division, as well as the discretionary funds he had access to. We cross-referenced every transaction with the company's approved vendor list." He slid a thick leather-bound dossier across the mahogany table. I opened it. The first page was a summary. The number at the bottom was circled in red ink. $2,400,000. I stared at the number. It was staggering. Not because it would bankrupt me. Vantage Capital moved billions daily, but because of the sheer audacity of the theft. Julian was a sales director. His salary was generous, his bonuses were guaranteed, and yet he had stolen nearly $2.5 million in less than 18 months. "Break it down for me," I said, my finger tracing the red ink. "Where did the money go?" Sarah stood up, tapping a key on her laptop. The projector screen behind her came to life, displaying a complex web of wire transfers and shell companies. "It appears Julian was not very sophisticated in his methods," Sarah explained, her voice clinical and detached. "He used a series of fake invoices from a vendor called J Squared Consulting. We traced the ownership of J Squared. It is registered to a P.O. box in New Jersey, and the beneficiary of the account I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The account is linked to a debit card used primarily for high-end retail and real estate payments," Sarah continued. "We found monthly transfers of $15,000 to a luxury apartment complex in Tribeca. The lease is in the name of Jessica Miller." I felt a cold laugh bubbling in my chest. He was using my company's money to pay for the rent of the mistress he was planning to replace me with. He was using my capital to build a love nest for the woman carrying the child he thought was his heir. Is that all? I asked, turning the page. No, Anderson interrupted, leaning forward. That accounts for roughly $400,000. The bulk of the missing funds, almost $2 million, went to a different entity, a company called Patricia Holdings, LLC, my mother-in-law. Of course, Patricia has been claiming for years that she is a brilliant real estate developer, I said dryly. I assume this money was for one of her visionary projects. Allegedly, Anderson said. The invoices describe an investment in a boutique hotel in the Catskills. However, we sent a surveyor to the address listed on the project manifest this morning. And I asked? There is no hotel, Anderson said. There is no construction site. It is a swampland, a literal swamp. The money was transferred to Patricia's personal account and then immediately drained. We tracked the spending. It went to online gambling sites, high-interest loan sharks, and luxury cruises. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a brief moment. The picture was complete. My husband wasn't just a cheater. He was the financier of a family-wide delusion. He had stolen from the company he claimed to work for to fund his mother's gambling addiction and his mistress's lifestyle, all while treating me, the actual owner of the money, like a parasite. He thought he was a provider. He thought he was a big man taking care of his women. But he was just a thief moving coins from my left pocket to my right pocket and keeping the change. Does he know we know? I asked, opening my eyes. No, Anderson confirmed. He is still under the impression that the board meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock is for his promotion. He arrived in the building 10 minutes ago. He is currently in his office boasting to the junior staff. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8:45. The fraud is federal, I stated. This crosses state lines. Yes, Anderson nodded. Wire fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. If we hand this file to the district attorney, he is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Minimum. I ran my hand over the smooth paper of the dossier. It was heavy. It felt like the weight of a gavel. And the appointment letter, I asked. The one he thinks he is signing today. Anderson pulled a single sheet of paper from a separate folder. It was a mock-up of a CEO appointment contract. We have it here, along with the termination notice and the civil lawsuit for damages. I stood up and the room went silent again. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the sprawling metropolis of New York. From this height, the cars looked like toys and the people were invisible. I felt a surge of clarity that was almost intoxicating. For years, I had made myself small to fit into their box. I had let Patricia mock my fertility. I had let Julian belittle my intelligence. I had let Candace treat me like a servant. I did it because I wanted a family. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I owned. But they didn't love me. They didn't even know me. They loved the convenience of me. And the moment that convenience stopped, they tried to discard me. Julian thinks he is walking into a coronation, I said to the reflection in the glass. He thinks he is going to walk into this boardroom and take the crown. I turned back to the legal team, my face set in stone. Let him come up, I commanded. Let him bring his mother. Let him bring his mistress. I want them all here. I want them to see exactly who sits in the big chair. But prepare the police, I added, adjusting the cuffs of my white blazer. Have them wait in the anteroom. When I give the signal, I want them to enter. Not before. Understood, Madam Chairman, Anderson said. One more thing, I said, pausing at the door of the boardroom. Did we recover the corporate credit card he gave to his sister? Yes, Sarah replied. We remotely bricked it while she was trying to buy a designer handbag online this morning. The transaction was declined. Good. I walked over to the head of the table and placed my hand on the leather chair that had been empty for too long. Let's start the meeting. As I sat down, I felt the final piece of the puzzle lock into place. This wasn't just business. This was personal. And I was about to give Julian the most educational performance review of his life. While I was upstairs systematically dismantling the financial architecture of his life 40 floors below in the polished granite lobby, Julian was making his grand entrance. I watched the security feed on my tablet, witnessing the exact moment his delusion collided with reality. He strode through the revolving glass doors with the swagger of a conquering hero. The rain outside had stopped, and the morning sun was glinting off the wet pavement, but Julian looked like he was walking on his own personal spotlight. He was wearing a navy blue three-piece suit that I knew for a fact cost $5,000 because I had seen the unauthorized withdrawal from the company expense account just 10 minutes ago. He had even accessorized with a silk pocket square and gold cufflinks, trying desperately to look like old money. Trailing behind him was Jessica. She was dressed in a tight cream-colored dress that was entirely inappropriate for a corporate environment, but perfect for the role she thought she was playing, which was the trophy wife of the CEO. She clung to Julian's arm, her eyes scanning the busy lobby with a mixture of intimidation and greed. She was looking at the marble floors, the abstract sculptures, and the rushing employees, not as things to admire, but as things she now owned by association. I could see Julian pointing at the ceiling, gesturing expansively, as if explaining to her how he ran the place. He stopped a passing intern, patting the young man on the shoulder with condescending familiarity, even though the intern looked completely confused. Julian was living in a movie in his head where he was the benevolent titan of industry returning to his kingdom. He approached the security turnstiles with a wide, expectant grin. This was his moment. He pulled out his lanyard, the one with the director of sales title that he believed was about to be swapped for a chief executive officer badge. He held the plastic card up for Jessica to see, giving her a wink before slashing it across the sensor pad with a flourish. Usually, the light would turn green, and the glass barriers would slide open silently, welcoming him into the inner sanctum. But today, the machine let out a harsh, low-pitched buzz. A bright red light flashed on the console. Access denied. Julian frowned, tapping the card against his thigh. He looked at the machine with annoyance, as if it were a disobedient pet. He tried again. This time he swiped slower, more deliberately. Buzz. Red light. Access denied. Behind him, a line of impatient traders and analysts was beginning to form. Someone cleared their throat. Julian turned around, glaring at them, before trying a third time. He slapped the card against the reader hard enough to make a plastic cracking sound. Buzz. "Come on, Julian," Jessica whined, her voice carrying over the low hum of the lobby. "Everyone is staring. Just fix it. It is just a glitch," Julian snapped loud enough for the security desk to hear. "Probably updating the system for my new clearance level. They probably wiped the old code to prepare for the CEO access." He stepped out of the line, pushing past a confused woman holding a tray of coffees, and marched toward the main reception desk. The receptionist was a young woman named Sarah, whom I had hired myself. She was known for her unflappable calm, a trait she was about to need. "Hey, sweetheart," Julian called out, leaning over the high marble counter. "My badge is acting up. I think I T-jumped the gun on the upgrade. Can you just buzz me through? I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. Sarah didn't smile. She didn't look up immediately. She finished typing something on her keyboard, her face illuminated by the cool blue light of her monitor. When she finally raised her eyes, they were blank, devoid of the usual friendly recognition Julian was used to. "Name," she asked simply. Julian laughed a short, incredulous bark. "Very funny. It is me, Julian. Julian Thorne. Your boss. Or at least your boss's boss, as of 9 o'clock. Now come on, open the gate. My fiancé is waiting." He gestured to Jessica, who was standing awkwardly by the turnstiles, trying to look important while holding her heavy designer bag. Sarah typed his name into the system. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked back at him. "I am sorry, Mr. Thorne. Your credentials have been revoked." "What did you say?" Julian asked, his smile faltering for the first time. "Your security clearance has been deactivated," Sarah repeated, her voice steady and professional. "The system shows that you are no longer an active employee. I cannot let you up." The color began to drain from Julian's face, but it was quickly replaced by a flush of anger. He slammed his hand onto the marble counter, making the phone jump. "Listen to me, you incompetent little girl," he hissed, leaning in until his breath fogged the glass partition. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am the incoming CEO. I am the one who signs your checks. If you don't open that gate right now, I will have you fired before lunch. Do you hear me? Fired. Sir, please lower your voice, Sarah said, not flinching. I am following protocol. The system says you are banned from the premises. Banned! Julian shouted, spinning around to face the lobby. His voice echoed off the high walls, stopping conversations dead. People froze mid-stride, turning to watch the spectacle. I cannot be banned. I own this place. This is a mistake. A clerical error. Call IT. Call HR. Call someone who actually has a brain. Jessica rushed over, grabbing his arm. Julian, stop it. People are filming, she whispered, looking terrified at the row of smartphones that had suddenly appeared in the hands of the onlookers. I don't care, Julian yelled, shaking her off. Let them film. Let them see how this place falls apart without me. He turned back to Sarah, pointing a shaking finger at her face. Call the chairman, right now. I am sorry, sir. The chairman is unavailable, Sarah replied. Don't give me that. Julian screamed, spitting slightly as he spoke. I know he is upstairs. He is waiting for me. We have a meeting at 9 to sign my contract. Call him and tell him his future CEO is being harassed by the help I watched on the screen as two large uniformed security guards stepped out from the shadows near the elevators. They didn't approach him aggressively. They just stood there, arms crossed, creating a physical wall between Julian and the elevators. Sir, you need to step back, one of the guards said, his voice deep and rumbling. You don't tell me what to do. Julian shrieked, his voice cracking. He looked manic now, hair disheveled, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at the guards, then at the receptionist, then at the crowd of people watching him with a mix of amusement and pity. I want to see the chairman. He bellowed at the ceiling as if God himself were listening. I am Julian Thorne. I brought in the chaotic deal. I saved the quarter. You can't treat me like this. I demand to see the person in charge. The irony was delicious. He was demanding to see the person in charge while standing in the lobby of the building she owned, screaming at the employees she paid. He was so convinced that the chairman was some elderly man, some silent partner he had charmed, that he couldn't see the trap closing around him. Jessica began to cry. Not silent tears, but loud, sobbing gasps. This isn't how it was supposed to be, she wailed. You said we were going to the penthouse. You said I was getting a tour. Shut up, Jessica, Julian snapped at her. Sir, if you do not lower your voice, we will have to escort you out, the guard warned, taking a step forward. You can't escort me out, Julian yelled, backing up until he hit the turnstiles. I have a meeting. I have a contract. This is sabotage. Someone is trying to sabotage my promotion. He looked around wildly, his eyes darting from face to face. It is Anderson, isn't it? He is jealous. Or maybe it is that snake from accounting. They hacked my badge. They are trying to make me late. He was unraveling. The cool, sophisticated executive mask had completely disintegrated, revealing the paranoid, entitled narcissist underneath. Sarah picked up the phone at her desk. She didn't call the police. She dialed a 4-digit extension. My extension. Upstairs in the boardroom, my phone rang. I put it on speaker so the entire legal team could hear. Madame Chairman Sarah's voice came through clear and calm. Mr. Thorne is in the lobby. He is causing a significant disturbance. He is demanding to see you. He claims he is the new CEO. I leaned forward toward the microphone. The room was silent. Anderson was smirking. Let him up, Sarah, I said, my voice cool and commanding. There was a pause on the other end. Sarah was surprised. She had expected me to order his removal. Let him up, she clarified. Yes, I replied. Override the elevator. Send him directly to the boardroom. And Sarah, yes. Madam, make sure he brings the girl. I want witnesses. Understood. I hung up. On the screen, I saw Sarah say something to the guards. They stepped aside. Sarah pressed a button under her desk. The turnstile beeped. Green light. Go ahead, Mr. Thorne, Sarah said, gesturing to the elevators. The chairman is expecting you. Julian froze. He blinked, looking from the guard to the green light. Then a smug, victorious grin spread across his face. He straightened his jacket, smoothing down his lapels. He turned to the crowd of onlookers and spread his arms wide. See, he shouted triumphantly. I told you it was a mistake. A glitch. The chairman knows who I am. He grabbed Jessica's hand, pulling her roughly through the gate. "Come on," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's go get my crown." He walked toward the elevators, strutting once again, convinced that he had won. He didn't know he was stepping into a cage. He didn't know that the elevator wasn't taking him to the top of the world. It was taking him to the slaughterhouse. And I was waiting with the knife. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The legal team sat like statues, their hands folded over the thick dossiers that contained the end of my husband's life as he knew it. The police officers were positioned silently in the adjoining anteroom, visible only through the frosted glass partition. We were all waiting for the elevator doors to slide open and deliver the man who thought he was a king but was walking into a guillotine. In this heavy, pregnant silence, my personal cell phone vibrated against the mahogany table. It was a sharp, jarring sound that made the junior associate jump. I looked down at the screen. The name flashing on the display was Marcus. I raised my hand, signaling for the room to remain quiet. I had expected this call. Marcus was the only person in the Thorne family who actually worked for a living. He was the chief accountant for a mid-sized logistics firm that was, unbeknownst to him, a tertiary subsidiary of Vantage Capital. He was a brilliant man, a forensic accountant by trade, who had married into a family of spendthrifts and narcissists. He was the only one who had treated me with a shred of decency over the years, perhaps because, as a black man in a circle of old white money, he understood what it felt like to be the outsider in the room. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. I did not say hello. "I am listening, Marcus." I said, my voice low and steady. "Victoria, thank God you picked up." His voice was breathless, tight, with a panic I had never heard from him before. I could hear the furious clicking of a keyboard in the background. He wasn't calling from a car, he was calling from his office. He had done exactly what I told him to do last night. He had gone to check the accounts. "Victoria, listen to me," he said, speaking rapidly. "I am at my desk. I pulled the master ledgers for the family trust like you said. I was trying to figure out how to untangle Candace's credit card debt before the banks opened. But Victoria, something is wrong. Everything is locked." I stared at the closed elevator doors, watching the floor indicator light change from 30 to 31. "What do you mean locked?" Marcus, I asked, though I knew the answer. "I mean everything," he stammered. "I tried to access the joint accounts to move some cash for groceries because the cards were declined this morning. The system gave me a level 5 security block. That is a federal freeze code, Victoria. That is the kind of code the SEC uses when they are shutting down a Ponzi scheme." He paused, and I heard the sound of paper being shuffled frantically. "But that isn't the crazy part," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I traced the freeze order. I have a friend in the compliance department who owes me a favor. I asked him to look up the source of the lockdown. I thought maybe Julian had done something stupid with the IRS. I thought maybe the government was seizing the assets. "And what did you find?" I asked. There was a heavy silence on the line. "The freeze didn't come from the government," Marcus said slowly. "It came from the parent company. It came from Vantage Capital directly." I said nothing. I let him connect the dots. He was a smart man. He just needed to say it out loud to believe it. I looked at the ownership structure, Victoria. He said, his voice trembling with realization. I dug into the shell companies. I looked at the trust deeds for the Hamptons house. I looked at the lease for the cars. I looked at the payroll for Julian's department. He took a deep, ragged breath. Every single document leads back to a blind trust. And when I cracked the beneficiary code on the trust, it didn't say Thorne Estate. It didn't say Vantage Holdings. What did it say, Marcus? It says Victoria Thorne, sole beneficial owner. The words hung in the air between us. Across the city in his cramped office, Marcus was staring at a computer screen that had just shattered his entire understanding of the world. He was realizing that the quiet sister-in-law who sat in the corner at Thanksgiving dinner while his wife mocked her cheap shoes was actually the woman who signed his paychecks. He was realizing that the family he had married into the family that prided themselves on their wealth were actually living on an allowance granted by the very woman they despised. "You are Vantage Capital," he whispered. "You aren't just rich, Victoria. You are the institution. You are Julian's boss. You are my boss." I didn't deny it. There was no point in hiding anymore. The time for shadows was over. "You were always the smart one, Marcus," I said softly. You were the only one who looked at the numbers instead of the appearances. You were the only one who treated me like a human being when the rest of them treated me like furniture. Victoria, he started, but he couldn't finish the sentence. The magnitude of the deception was too great. Listen to me closely, Marcus. I interrupted, my voice hardening. You have been loyal to your wife even though she is a spoiled brat. You have been a good father to your children. I respect that. That is why I am talking to you right now. The elevator indicator pinged. Floor 39. Julian was seconds away. What is going to happen? He asked, fear creeping into his tone. I am about to terminate the infection, I said. Julian is in the elevator right now. He is coming up here thinking he is getting a promotion. He doesn't know that I am waiting for him. He doesn't know that he is walking into a felony indictment. Oh my God, Marcus breathed. But the blast radius is going to be wide, Marcus, I warned. When I drop the hammer on Julian, it is going to shatter everything connected to him. The house in the Hamptons is already gone. The credit cards are dead. The cars are being repossessed as we speak. Patricia is going to lose her nursing home suite by noon. Candace is going to lose her allowance permanently. Victoria, please. Candace is pregnant with our second. I know, I said, cutting him off. And because I know you are a good man, I am giving you a head start. I checked my watch. 8:58. You have 3 hours, Marcus. Get Candace and the kids. Pack only what you can carry. Do not take anything that was purchased with the family credit cards because the repo men will be waiting at the gate. Take your personal savings and get out of that house. Go to your apartment in Queens. Go to a hotel. Just get away from the blast zone. And Candace, he asked, she won't want to leave. She thinks she owns that house. Tell her the truth, I said, coldness seeping back into my voice. Tell her who really owns the roof over her head. Tell her that her sister-in-law just fired her entire family. If she refuses to leave, let her stay and face the marshals. But save your children, Marcus. I could hear him breathing hard, trying to process the instructions. Why are you telling me this, he asked. After how they treated you, after how Candace treated you, why give me a warning? Because you were the only one who didn't laugh, I replied. When Julian slapped me, when Patricia mocked me, you were the only one who didn't laugh. That buys you a 3-hour head start. Don't waste it. Thank you, Victoria, he whispered. Thank you. Goodbye, Marcus, I said. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. At that exact moment, a soft chime echoed through the room. The light above the heavy steel elevator doors turned green. The gears whirred and the doors began to slide open. I interlaced my fingers and placed them on the table in front of me. I looked at the empty chair at the opposite end of the long table. The trap was set. The warnings had been given. The innocent had been evacuated. Now it was time for the slaughter. The doors opened fully, revealing Julian standing there with a wide, arrogant grin, his arm around Jessica's waist, ready to claim a kingdom that had never been his. I sat at the head of the boardroom table, my fingers interlaced over the cold mahogany surface. The physical dossier of Julian's crimes lay open before me, but my attention was focused on the large, high-definition monitor mounted on the far wall. It was connected to the internal security feed of the Hamptons estate. After the spectacle in the lobby, Julian had been escorted out of the building. Despite his screaming and his threats of lawsuits, the security team had physically removed him before he could reach the elevators. He had been told that the chairman was reviewing his conduct and that he should return home to await further instructions. He took that as a victory. He thought I was afraid. He thought the chairman was considering his demands. So he had gathered his mother and his mistress and driven back to the villa in a rage, convinced that he needed to rally his forces. He didn't know he was driving back to a crime scene where he was the perpetrator. On the screen, I watched as Julian's car screeched into the driveway. The rain had stopped, leaving the grounds wet and glistening in the morning light. He slammed the car door shut, not bothering to hold an umbrella for his pregnant mistress or his elderly mother. They stormed up the front steps like a conquering army that had been temporarily inconvenienced. The digital clock on the screen read 10:15 in the morning. The audio feed crackled to life. I could hear their voices clearly picked up by the high-fidelity microphones I had installed in the foyer years ago for security purposes. "I can't believe they treated me like that," Julian was shouting, pacing back and forth on the Persian rug, his wet shoes leaving muddy streaks. "Do they know who I am? I am the CEO. That receptionist is dead. As soon as the paperwork is signed, she is on the street." Patricia threw her fur coat onto the antique entryway table, knocking over a vase of fresh lilies. "It was humiliating, Julian," she hissed, her face twisted in a scowl. "You promised me a tour. You promised me we would be drinking champagne in the executive suite. Instead, we were paraded out like common criminals." "Don't worry," Mother Julian said, running a hand through his damp hair. "It is just a power play. The old board members are scared of me. They are trying to rattle me before the signing, but I won't break. I need a drink. Where is the staff?" He looked around, expecting a butler or a maid to appear. The house was silent. The staff had followed my instructions and vacated the premises an hour ago. "Hello!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "Is anyone working today?" Silence. "Lazy incompetence," Patricia muttered. "I will have them all fired too. Julian, give me your card. I need to order some food. I am famished, and I need a massage therapist to come to the house immediately. My nerves are shot." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Use the digital wallet," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The physical cards were acting up, but the account is fine. Just order whatever you want. Get the caviar service from that place in town. We deserve it." I watched as Patricia pulled out her tablet and opened a delivery app. She tapped the screen furiously, adding hundreds of dollars worth of luxury food and spa services to the cart. She pressed confirm. A sharp beep echoed from her device. "What is this?" she snapped, frowning at the screen. "It says payment declined." "Try again," Julian said, loosening his tie. "It is probably the internet connection." She tapped again. Beep. "Transaction failed. Contact your financial institution." Patricia's face turned a shade of purple that matched her dress. "Julian!" she shrieked. "It isn't working. It says insufficient funds." "That is impossible," Julian scoffed, walking over to her. "There is $50,000 in the checking account. I checked it yesterday." He snatched the tablet from her hands and tried to override the payment. He tried a different card. Beep. He tried the credit line. Beep. He tried the emergency overdraft protection. Beep. I watched on the monitor as the realization began to seep into the room like a poisonous gas. Julian pulled out his own phone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he logged into the mobile banking app. I saw his eyes widen. I saw his jaw drop. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What do you mean, gone?" Jessica asked, looking up from the sofa where she was rubbing her feet. "It's zero," Julian said, holding the phone up for them to see. "The checking account, the savings, the investment portfolio. It is all showing zero. And look." He pointed to a red banner across the top of the screen. "Account frozen. Refer to legal department. Use of funds prohibited under Protocol Omega. Victoria." Patricia screamed the name, tearing from her throat like a curse. "It is that witch. She did this. She locked us out. How could she?" Julian stammered, staring at the phone. "She doesn't have the passwords. She doesn't have the authority. These are my accounts." Technically, they were his accounts in name only, but the funding source, the master tap that filled those accounts, was entirely controlled by the trust, and I had turned off the tap. "She is trying to starve us out," Jessica cried, standing up and wobbling slightly on her heels. "Julian, what are we going to do? I need to eat." "The baby needs to eat. We are not going to let her win," Julian roared, throwing his phone onto the couch. "She wants to play dirty." "Fine. We will play dirty. She thinks she can hide behind her lawyers and her locks. But she forgot one thing. We have the court of public opinion." "What are you doing?" Patricia asked, as Julian grabbed a tripod from the corner of the room. "I am going live." Julian declared, his eyes gleaming with a manic desperation. "If she wants a war, she gets a war. We are going to expose her. We are going to tell the world that Victoria Thorne is a thief, a liar, and an abuser. We are going to destroy her reputation before she can spend a single dime of that stolen money." I leaned forward in my chair in the boardroom. My legal team watched in silence as the scene unfolded. Julian set up the phone on the tripod facing the grand living room. He adjusted the lighting, making sure the dreary rain-soaked window was in the background to set a somber mood. He pulled Jessica over, positioning her in the center. "Look sad," he whispered to her. "Hold your stomach. Look like a victim." Jessica obliged immediately, dropping her shoulders and putting on a pouty, tearful expression that she had likely practiced in the mirror. Patricia stood behind them, looking stern and aggrieved. Julian hit the button. "Go live." "Hello, everyone," Julian began, his voice dropping an octave to sound grave and serious. "I don't normally do this. I am a private person, but today my family has been attacked." He paused for dramatic effect, checking the view count. It was rising rapidly. The drama of the wealthy always attracts a crowd. My wife, Victoria Julian, continued, looking directly into the camera lens, lying with a sociopathic ease, has emptied our bank accounts. She has abandoned me, my elderly mother, and my pregnant fiancé without a penny to our names. She has locked us in this house without food, without staff, and without resources. He put a hand on Jessica's shoulder. "This is Jessica. She is carrying my child. Victoria is jealous. She is a bitter, barren woman who cannot conceive, so she has decided to punish us for our happiness. She stole my money I earned from years of hard work, and now she is somewhere in the city laughing while we starve." Patricia chimed in, leaning over his shoulder. "She is a monster. She has always been a leech, feeding off my son's success, and now that he has found true love, she wants to destroy him. Please, if anyone is watching, help us. We need legal aid. We need justice." The comments on the live stream were flying by. I could see them on the screen. Some people were sympathetic, sending heart emojis. But many others were skeptical, asking why they were in a $10 million mansion if they were starving. I sat there, my face expressionless. They were digging their own grave. Every lie they told was being recorded. Every accusation was libel. They were handing me the evidence I needed to sue them for defamation on top of the fraud. But then the mood in the villa shifted. Jessica was reading the comments on a separate tablet. Her face started to turn red. "They aren't believing us, Julian," she snapped. "Look at this comment. Someone said, 'If you are so rich, why don't you have a savings account?' And this one says, 'That looks like the Vantage Capital estate. Isn't that owned by the wife?'" "Shut up," Julian hissed at her, covering the microphone. "Just keep crying." "I don't want to cry." Jessica screamed, her temper flaring. "I am hungry, and I am sick of looking at her stuff." She gestured wildly around the room. The living room was filled with art I had collected over the years, modern sculptures, rare vases, and abstract paintings. To Jessica, these were just symbols of the woman she was trying to replace. "Why does she get to keep all this?" she yelled, picking up a heavy crystal vase from the coffee table. "This is probably worth more than my car, and she gets to keep it while we beg for food." "Put that down," Jessica Julian warned, realizing she was going off script. "No," she screamed. "I hate her. I hate this house. I hate everything about her." She hurled the crystal vase across the room. It smashed into the fireplace, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound was deafening on the audio feed. "Jessica, stop it," Patricia yelled, but Jessica was past the point of reason. The adrenaline of the situation, the hunger and the realization that her golden ticket was turning into a nightmare had snapped something inside her. She ran to the wall where a large abstract painting hung. It was a Basquiat original worth $3 million. She ripped it off the wall, her nails tearing through the canvas. "She doesn't deserve this," she shrieked, throwing the frame onto the floor and stomping on it with her high heels. "She is nothing. She is garbage." Julian tried to grab her, but she shoved him away. She grabbed a bronze statue from a pedestal, a heavy modernist piece, and swung it like a baseball bat. She aimed for the glass display case that held my collection of antique porcelain. Smash! The sound of shattering glass and crushing ceramic filled the room. I watched from the boardroom, my heart skipping a single beat. That porcelain collection had belonged to my grandmother. It was the only thing I had left of her. Jessica continued her rampage, destroying millions of dollars of art in a frenzy of jealousy and rage. Julian stood there useless, holding the phone, filming the destruction, his jaw hanging open. He wasn't stopping her. In fact, as I looked closer, I saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He enjoyed seeing my things destroyed. He enjoyed seeing my legacy turn to dust. "Let it burn," he muttered softly, barely audible on the microphone. "Let her come back to a pile of trash." I reached out and pressed the intercom button on the boardroom table, connecting me to the police captain waiting in the anteroom. "Captain," I said, my voice ice cold. "Yes, Ms. Thorne," the captain replied. "Are you watching the feed?" "Yes, ma'am." "We see it. That is felony destruction of property." I said, my eyes fixed on the screen where Jessica was now tearing the curtains off the windows, in addition to the fraud and the embezzlement. "We have enough, ma'am," the captain said. "The unit is 2 minutes away. Execute the warrant," I commanded. "Break down the door if you have to. And Captain, yes, make sure the live stream is still running when you cuff them. I want the world to see how the billionaire class handles trash." I leaned back in my chair, watching as Jessica picked up a heavy candelabra, preparing to throw it at the television. "Go ahead, Jessica," I whispered to the screen. "Break it all. You are just adding zeros to your prison sentence." The sound of sirens cut through the audio feed like a knife slicing through the heavy tension in the boardroom. On the screen, I saw Julian freeze. He was standing amidst the wreckage of my living room, holding a shard of the shattered vase he had just encouraged his mistress to break. His head snapped toward the front window, where the flashing blue and red lights were already painting the rain-soaked driveway in a chaotic disco of colors. "They are here!" Julian shouted to his mother and Jessica, his voice cracking with relief. He dropped the ceramic shard and ran his hands through his hair, trying to smooth it down. He looked into the camera of his phone, which was still streaming live to thousands of people. "Did you hear that?" everyone, he said to his audience, his confidence surging back. "The police have arrived. Justice is finally here. We are going to have that woman arrested for theft and abandonment. Watch this. Watch how the law protects honest citizens." He grabbed the tripod and ran toward the front door. Patricia followed him, clutching her pearls, her face set in a mask of righteous indignation. Jessica trailed behind, wiping her fake tears and checking her makeup in the reflection of the hall mirror. They looked like actors taking their places for the final act of a play they thought they had written. I sat back in my leather chair 40 floors away and took a sip of my cold espresso. They were right about one thing. The law was here, but they had fundamentally misunderstood who the law protects. Julian threw open the double front doors before the officers could even knock. The wind and rain swept into the foyer, but he didn't care. He stood there, arms wide open, welcoming the squad of uniformed officers like they were old friends arriving for a dinner party. "Thank God you are here, officers!" Julian bellowed over the sound of the storm. "My name is Julian Thorne. I am the victim. My wife has embezzled funds and locked us in here. I want to file immediate charges." He pointed the camera at the officers, expecting them to nod in sympathy. But the officers didn't smile. They didn't offer condolences. They didn't step inside with notebooks ready to take his statement. Instead, a wall of blue uniforms parted. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. It was Sheriff Miller. I knew him well. 2 years ago, when the department needed funding for new body cameras and tactical gear, the town council had voted no. I had stepped in through my charitable foundation and written a check for the entire budget. I never asked for favors. I only asked that they do their jobs with integrity. Sheriff Miller looked at Julian with eyes that were as cold and gray as the Atlantic Ocean. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at the weeping Jessica. He looked directly at Julian. "Mr. Thorne, step back," the sheriff ordered, his voice deep and authoritative. Julian blinked, confused by the tone. "Sheriff, I am the one who called," he stammered. "Well, actually, I didn't call, but I'm glad you came. You need to find Victoria. She is the one you want." "Step aside," Sheriff Miller repeated louder this time, placing a hand on his holster. "We are not here for your wife." Julian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Behind the sheriff, a second group of men emerged from the rain. They were not police officers. They were wearing gray coveralls with the logo of a private asset management firm stitched onto the chest. They carried clipboards, packing tape, and heavy moving dollies. "Who are they?" Patricia screeched, stepping forward and pointing a manicured finger at the men. "Why are there workmen here? We didn't order any movers. Get them off my property immediately." Sheriff Miller reached into his waterproof jacket and pulled out a folded document. He didn't hand it to Julian. He handed it to the lead foreman of the moving crew. "Clear the premises," the sheriff said to the movers. "You have the authorization." "Wait a minute." Julian shouted, trying to block the doorway. "You can't do that. This is my house. These are my things. You can't just let strangers in here. I am live streaming this. The world is watching you violate my rights." Sheriff Miller finally turned his gaze to Julian. He looked at the phone, then back at Julian's face. "This is not your house, Mr. Thorne. What are you talking about?" Julian laughed nervously. "Of course it is. I have lived here for 5 years. My mother has her own wing. This property was foreclosed upon at 8:30 this morning," Sheriff Miller stated calmly. "The deed was held by a trust. The mortgage on the property had a call clause. The debt was purchased by a private equity firm this morning, and they immediately exercised their right to foreclose due to a breach of contract." I watched Patricia's face go pale. She understood real estate enough to know what that meant, but she didn't understand how it had happened so fast. "That is impossible," she sputtered. "Mortgages take months to foreclose. You have to give notice. You have to go to court. Not when the debt is a distress asset, Patricia," I whispered to myself in the boardroom. "I had arranged it hours ago. The mortgage on the Hamptons estate was technically held by a bank, but the terms of the loan, which I had dictated years ago, allowed the lender to call in the full amount immediately if the occupant engaged in criminal activity or if the credit rating of the primary guarantor fell below a certain threshold. When I activated Protocol Omega, Julian's credit score didn't just drop, it evaporated. I then had Vantage Capital purchase the debt note from the bank for full value plus a premium. As the new owner of the debt, I demanded immediate payment. When they couldn't pay, which I knew they couldn't, I seized the collateral. The house wasn't theirs. It was mine. Again. Sheriff Miller held up the foreclosure order. "The new owner has requested immediate vacancy. You and your guests are trespassing. You have 10 minutes to collect personal essential items and leave." Trespassing, Julian screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. "This is insane. Who is the new owner? I want to speak to them. I will sue them. I will own them." "The owner is Vantage Capital Distressed Assets Division," Sheriff Miller said. Julian froze. The name of the company he thought he was running. The company he thought was his kingdom. The movers pushed past Julian, marching into the foyer with muddy boots. They began placing neon orange stickers on the furniture. One sticker on the grandfather clock. One sticker on the antique mirror. "Stop it!" Jessica wailed, trying to pull a sticker off a statue. "That is mine. Julian bought that for me." "Actually," Miss Sheriff Miller said, stepping between her and the statue, "that item was purchased with funds that are currently the subject of a federal investigation. It is evidence. Touch it again, and I will arrest you for tampering." Federal investigation. Julian whispered, the fight draining out of him. Sheriff Miller turned back to Julian. He pulled another document from his jacket. This one was thicker. It had a red stamp on the front. "Julian Thorne, I am serving you with a search and seizure warrant issued by the District Attorney's Office. Search warrant." Julian gasped. "For what?" "I haven't done anything. For money laundering, wire fraud, and embezzlement," the sheriff read from the paper. "We have probable cause to believe that this residence contains evidence of a scheme to defraud Vantage Capital of over $2 million. The camera in Julian's hand shook violently. The comments on the live stream were exploding. I could see them scrolling past at lightning speed. Did the cop say, "Money laundering, OMG, he is not the victim, he is the crook. He stole from his own wife. Look at his face, he is guilty." Julian looked down at the phone, realizing too late that he was broadcasting his own funeral. He tried to fumble with the screen to end the stream, but his hands were shaking too badly. "And one more thing," Sheriff Miller added, pulling out a third document. "This is a restraining order granted by Family Court Judge Patterson." "Restraining order?" Patricia asked, her voice trembling. "Against who?" "Against all of you," the sheriff said. "Victoria Thorne has successfully petitioned for protection. You are ordered to stay 500 feet away from her place of business, and any property owned by her or her companies, which includes this house." But she is my wife," Julian whimpered. "She is the victim of your financial abuse," Sheriff Miller corrected him. And looking at the state of this living room, he gestured to the shattered vase and the torn painting that Jessica had destroyed just moments ago. "It appears she is also the victim of malicious destruction of property." Sheriff Miller signaled to two of his deputies. "Cuff them!" "What?" Julian shrieked, backing away. "No, you can't arrest me. I am a CEO. I am a wealthy man. This is a misunderstanding. You are under arrest for felony criminal mischief," the sheriff said, his voice bored. "We watched you live stream it, Mr. Thorne. You filmed your mistress destroying artwork valued at over $3 million. You stood there and encouraged it. That makes you an accessory." The deputies moved in. They grabbed Jessica first. She screamed, kicking and flailing as they pulled her arms behind her back. "I am pregnant," she yelled. "You can't touch me. I am pregnant with a billionaire's baby." "You are under arrest, ma'am," the deputy said, snapping the handcuffs on her wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." They moved to Julian. He dropped the phone. It landed face up on the rug, the camera pointing at the ceiling, capturing the audio of his struggle. "Get off me!" Julian shouted. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," Sheriff Miller said, looking down at the phone. "We all know who you are now. You are the man who thought he could steal from Victoria Thorne." The deputies forced Julian's hands behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the foyer. Patricia stood against the wall, clutching her chest, her face a mask of pure terror. She wasn't being arrested yet, but she was watching her retirement plan being hauled away in chains. Sheriff Miller looked at her. "You have 5 minutes to pack a bag, Mrs. Thorne," he said. "If you are still here when the movers are done, we will arrest you for trespassing." "Where am I supposed to go?" she sobbed. "I have nowhere to go." "That is not a police matter," the sheriff said, turning his back on her. I watched on the monitor as they dragged Julian and Jessica out into the rain. Julian was still shouting, still threatening, still trying to leverage a power he never really had. I reached out and tapped the screen, ending the live stream from my end. The show was over. In the boardroom, the silence was heavy, but it was a comfortable silence. My legal team looked at me with a new level of respect. They had seen hostile takeovers before, but they had never seen a hostile extraction executed with such surgical precision. Anderson closed the dossier. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "that solves the issue of the severance package." I stood up, walking to the window to look out at the city one last time. "Yes," I said. "I suppose it does." I checked my watch. It was 11 o'clock. "Draft the press release," I told Anderson. "State that Vantage Capital has uncovered a minor internal irregularity and has dealt with it swiftly. Announce that I will be assuming the role of public CEO effective immediately." And Julian Anderson asked, "What do we say about him?" "Say nothing," I replied, turning to face them. "He never existed." I picked up my briefcase. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have a plane to catch. I believe Paris is beautiful this time of year, and I have some shopping to do. After all, I have a lot of empty wall space to fill in the Hamptons." The boardroom on the 45th floor of the Vantage Capital Tower was designed to intimidate. The walls were lined with dark, soundproofed walnut paneling, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, a view that usually made men feel like gods. But today, the room felt less like Olympus, and more like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. I sat in the massive leather chair at the head of the long obsidian table, with my back to the door. I stared out at the city, watching the clouds drift past the Empire State Building. My legal team and the board members sat silently along the sides of the table. No one spoke. No one checked their phones. The air was thick with the kind of tension that precedes an execution. I had arranged for Julian to be brought here. After the spectacle at the house and his arrest, I had instructed the legal team to intervene. They had contacted the district attorney and arranged for a temporary release into the custody of the company's security team under the pretense of an internal corporate investigation that took precedence over the immediate booking. Julian, in his infinite narcissism, had interpreted this not as a stay of execution, but as a rescue. He believed that the chairman, the mysterious, powerful figure he had never met, had seen the injustice of his arrest and had summoned him to hear his side of the story. He believed he was coming here to be saved. I heard the heavy double doors click open behind me. I did not turn around. I heard the shuffling of feet and the clinking of handcuffs being removed. The police officers I had requested to remain in the room stepped back, taking their positions by the wall. "Mr. Thorne, the chairman will see you now." "Anderson," my general counsel said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Thank God." Julian exhaled loudly. I knew it. I knew someone in this insane city still had some sanity. I listened to his footsteps as he walked onto the plush carpet. He was pacing, agitated, but gaining confidence with every second. Where is he? Julian asked, his voice raspy from the screaming he had done earlier. Is he in the washroom? Look, you need to tell him that those police officers were completely out of line. They dragged me out of my own house. They arrested my fiancé. It was a nightmare. And it is all because of that woman, my wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife. He paused, waiting for a response. When none came, he continued, his voice rising in pitch. She is mentally unstable. I tried to protect the company from her. She hacked my accounts. She fabricated evidence. She is trying to destroy my reputation because she is jealous of my promotion. I need the chairman to authorize a countersuit. I need him to unfreeze my assets so I can hire a real legal team. I am the incoming CEO, for God's sake. You can't treat talent like this. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the armrests of the chair. I let him talk. I let him dig the hole deeper and deeper until he hit the bedrock of his own delusion. And another thing, Julian ranted, slamming his hand on the table. When I take over tomorrow, I am firing the entire security staff and the receptionist and that sheriff. I want them all gone. I want people who are loyal. I want people who understand that Julian Thorne is not a man to be trifled with. He was standing right behind me now. I could smell the stale sweat and the lingering scent of his expensive cologne, now sour with fear. Is he listening? Julian asked, tapping the back of my chair. Hello, Mr. Chairman, are you awake? I am talking to you. I am here to report a crime. I am here to report my wife, Victoria Thorne. She is a snake. She is a nobody, and I want her destroyed. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had waited 5 years for. The moment every insult, every slight, every betrayal had been leading to. I pressed the button on the armrest. The hydraulic mechanism hummed softly. Slowly, deliberately, the massive leather chair began to rotate. As I turned, I saw Julian's face. He was leaning forward, an ingratiating smile plastered on his lips, ready to charm the old man he expected to see. He was ready to shake hands. He was ready to bond over the difficulties of dealing with hysterical women. The chair completed its rotation. I locked eyes with him. The smile froze on his face. It didn't drop immediately. It just stuck there like a glitch in a video file. His eyes blinked once, twice. His brain was struggling to process the visual data. He was looking for the chairman. He was looking for an old white man in a suit. Instead, he was looking at his wife. He looked at me. Then he looked around the room at the board members who were staring at me with deference. Then he looked back at me. Victoria, he whispered, his voice trembling with confusion. What are you doing here? Get out of the chairman's chair. Are you crazy? If he sees you sitting there, he will kill you. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and steepled my fingers. You wanted to see the chairman, Julian? I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. Yes, he stammered, looking at the door. I am waiting for him. I need to tell him about you. I am the chairman, Julian. He laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Stop joking. This isn't the time for your games. Where is he? I stood up. The movement was sharp and commanding. Look around you, Julian. Look at these people. Do you see Anderson? Do you see Sarah? Do you see the board of directors? Who are they looking at? Julian looked around. Every pair of eyes was fixed on me, not with pity, but with the absolute respect accorded to the person who signs the checks. No, he whispered, backing away. No, that is impossible. You are just a housewife. You plan parties, you buy flowers, you don't run a hedge fund, you don't know anything about business. I founded Vantage Capital 7 years ago, I said, stepping around the table and walking toward him. The name Vantage. It comes from the street I grew up on, the street you said was too poor to visit. I built this company with the inheritance you thought was small. I hired you. I promoted you. I approved your bonuses. Every dollar you have spent in the last 5 years came from me. He shook his head violently, his reality fracturing in real time. No, You are lying. You are doing this to humiliate me. You can't be the chairman. You are weak. You let me walk all over you. I didn't let you walk over me, Julian, I said, stopping inches from his face. I was observing you. I was testing you. I wanted to see if you could be the man you claimed to be. But you failed. You failed as a husband. You failed as a man. And you certainly failed as an employee. You wanted to meet the chairman to report your wife, I asked, letting a cold smile touch my lips. Hello, Julian. I am listening. He stared at me, and for the first time I saw the true depth of his terror. He wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was looking at the architect of his destruction. Victoria, please, he choked out, reaching for my hand. If this is true, if you really are, then you can stop this. You can tell the police it was a mistake. We are family. I am your husband. I pulled my hand away as if he were contagious. Sit down, Julian, I commanded, pointing to a small wooden chair in the center of the room. It was the only chair that wasn't leather. It was the interrogation chair. He sat. He collapsed into it, really, his legs giving way. Now, I said, walking back to the head of the table and picking up a remote control. Let's review your performance. I pressed a button on the remote. The lights in the boardroom dimmed automatically. A massive screen descended from the ceiling behind me. Slide 1 appeared. It was a forensic accounting spreadsheet titled Unauthorized Dispersals, Julian Thorne. You claimed you generated millions for this company. I said, using a laser pointer to circle the red numbers. But according to this, you were actually a liability. $2.4 million, Julian. That is what you stole. I didn't steal it, he whimpered, wringing his hands. It was for business development. Networking, you know how it is. The next slide clicked into place. It was a montage of receipts, Hermes handbags, first-class flights to the Maldives, a lease on a Tribeca apartment, online gambling debts. Is this business development? I asked, pointing to a receipt for a $50,000 diamond necklace. Is Jessica Miller a client? Julian looked down at his shoes, unable to look at the screen. I bought the debt on your mother's house? I continued, clicking to the next slide. It showed the foreclosure deed with my signature at the bottom. The house is gone, Julian. Patricia is currently in a motel in Queens because that is all she could afford with the cash in her purse. He flinched. My mother... You did that to my mother. She raised a thief, I replied coldly. She is reaping what she sowed, but I saved the best for last, Julian. I clicked the remote one final time. The screen changed. It wasn't a financial document. It was a medical report, specifically a prenatal DNA test, when you announced that Jessica was pregnant with your heir. You were very proud, I said, walking slowly toward him. You said she could do the one thing I couldn't. You said she was a real woman. Julian looked up, his eyes wet with tears. She is pregnant. That is my son. At least let me have my son, Victoria, please. I will sign whatever you want. Just let me have my family. I looked at him with a mixture of disgust and pity. You really are a fool, Julian. I pointed to the screen. We ran a background check on Jessica Miller when we found out she was on the payroll. We monitored her communications. We accessed her medical records, which she foolishly uploaded to the company cloud server. I zoomed in on the results section of the DNA test. Probability of paternity, Julian Thorne, 0.00%. Julian gasped. The sound was like a balloon popping. What? What does that mean? He whispered. It means you are not the father I stated. Then who is he? Asked his voice, barely audible. I clicked the remote again. A photo appeared next to the document. It was a man, a very fit, muscular man with a deep tan. Meet Carlos, I introduced. He is Jessica's personal trainer, the one you paid for, the one you sent her to 3 times a week so she could stay in shape for you. I leaned in close to Julian's ear. You paid for the sessions, Julian. You paid for the hotel rooms where they met. You even paid for the prenatal vitamins. You funded your own cuckolding. Julian stared at the screen, his mouth hung open. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. No, he wailed, a low, guttural sound of pure animal misery. No, she loves me, she said. I was the only one. She loves your money, Julian, I corrected him. And since you never actually had any money, she loved my money. But now the money is gone, and so is she. Julian looked at me. He looked at the board members. He looked at the police officers. He realized that there was no corner of the room, no corner of the city, and no corner of his life that hadn't been obliterated. He tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't support him. He slid off the chair, crashing onto the floor. He lay there on the expensive carpet, curling into a fetal position. He began to sob. Ugly, loud, heaving sobs that echoed in the sterile room. The man who had slapped me 12 hours ago. The man who had sneered at my infertility. The man who had called me useless. He was now a puddle of tears at my feet. I stood over him, looking down. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound sense of completion. "Get him up," I said to the police officers. The officers stepped forward and hauled Julian to his feet. He was limp, dead weight. "Where are you taking me?" he mumbled through his tears. "To federal prison, Julian," I said, turning my back on him and walking toward the window. "My lawyers have already handed the evidence to the FBI. You will be arraigned in the morning." I looked out at the city, at the world that was mine. "And Julian," I added over my shoulder. He looked up, eyes red and swollen. "Happy birthday to me." The doors closed behind him, cutting off his sobbing. I was alone in the boardroom. I took a sip of my water. It was cool and refreshing. The execution was complete. The cleanup was just beginning. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The federal agents did not handle Julian with the gentleness he had grown accustomed to in his life of unearned privilege. As he was hauled up from the boardroom floor, the reality of his situation finally pierced through his delusion. He was not a CEO. He was not a victim. He was a federal prisoner. I stood by the window and watched as they marched him out. He tried to catch the eye of the board members' men he had laughed with at golf courses just weeks prior, but they all looked away, studying their manicured fingernails or checking their phones. In the world of high finance, failure is contagious, and Julian was radioactive. The elevator ride down was the longest of his life. When the doors opened in the lobby, the same lobby where he had screamed at the receptionist just hours earlier, the silence was deafening. Sarah, the young woman he had threatened, looked up from her desk. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply watched him pass, her eyes filled with a cool, professional indifference that hurt him more than any insult could have. He was led out through the revolving doors and into the back of an unmarked black sedan, not the limousine he had arrived in, but a cage on wheels that would take him to the Metropolitan Detention Center. He would trade his Italian silk suit for an orange jumpsuit and his corner office for a 6x8 cell. The charges of wire fraud and embezzlement carried a mandatory minimum sentence. By the time Julian walked free again, his hair would be gray and the world would have forgotten his name. But the collapse of the House of Thorn did not end with him. The shockwaves traveled fast. Across the city, Patricia sat in the lobby of the exclusive senior living facility she had called home for 3 years. It was a place of marble floors and fresh orchids, a place where she could pretend she was still the matriarch of a powerful dynasty. She was waiting for her afternoon tea service when the manager approached her. He was not smiling. In his hand was a tablet displaying a declined transaction notification. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice loud enough for the other residents to hear. "We have attempted to process your monthly fee for the 3rd time today. The bank indicates that the account no longer exists." Patricia scoffed, adjusting her pearls. "That is ridiculous. My son handles my finances." "Call him." "We have tried," the manager replied, cold and firm. "His phone is disconnected. And frankly, Mrs. Thorne, given the news reports regarding your son's arrest for massive fraud, we can no longer extend you credit. You have 1 hour to vacate the suite." Patricia was escorted out not by a chauffeur, but by a security guard. She stood on the curb with 2 suitcases containing her furs and her jewelry. But furs do not buy food, and jewelry is hard to sell when you have no receipts. She ended up in a cramped studio apartment in a rundown part of Queens, a place with peeling wallpaper and the smell of boiled cabbage in the hallway. There were no maids here. No tea service, just the relentless dripping of a leaky faucet and the terrifying silence of a phone that never rang. She had spent her life judging others for their poverty, and now she would spend her remaining years living inside the very thing she despised. Then there was Candace, my sister-in-law who had tried to rip the purse from my hands. She had rushed back to her own home expecting safety, only to find Marcus standing in the driveway. He was packing the car, but he wasn't packing her designer dresses. He was packing the children's toys and his own clothes. "Marcus, where are we going?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. "Did you talk to Victoria? Did you fix this?" Marcus looked at her with eyes that were tired but clear. "There is no fixing this, Candace. I talked to Victoria. She gave me a choice. She told me to get out of the blast zone." "What are you talking about?" Candace screamed, grabbing his arm. "We need to sue her. We need to take the house back." "There is no house," Marcus said, pulling his arm away. "The lease on this place was paid by Julian's company card. The car is leased by the trust. It is all gone, Candace. And I am leaving." "Leaving?" she gasped. "You can't leave me. I am your wife." "I am leaving to protect our children," Marcus said, handing her a thick envelope. "These are divorce papers. I am filing for full custody. I cannot have our children raised in an environment of entitlement and theft. I am taking them to a place where they will learn the value of hard work. Something you never learned." He got into the car, the modest sedan he had bought with his own salary. The children were already in the back seat looking out at their mother with confused eyes. Marcus drove away, leaving Candace standing alone in the driveway of a house that was about to be locked by the bank. She fell to her knees, weeping not for the loss of her husband, but for the loss of her lifestyle. She realized too late that the man she had called a coward was the only one who had the strength to survive. While the ashes of their lives settled over New York, I was already moving forward. I walked across the private tarmac at Teterboro Airport. The afternoon sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the sleek white fuselage of the Gulfstream G650. This was not a company jet. This was my jet, purchased with the dividends of my patience and the interest on my suffering. I paused at the top of the stairs and looked back at the skyline of New York City. From this distance, the city looked peaceful. It was hard to believe that somewhere in that concrete jungle, my husband was sitting in a holding cell, answering questions about money he had stolen from me to buy gifts for another woman. It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like a story that happened to someone else. The pilot stood at the door waiting. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Thorne. Flight time to Paris is 7 hours. We have your favorite vintage on ice." "Thank you, Captain," I said, stepping into the cabin. The interior was cream and gold, soft and silent. I sat in the window seat and accepted the glass of champagne. As the engines roared to life, I felt a vibration that wasn't fear. It was power. For 5 years I had played a role. I had dimmed my light so Julian wouldn't be blinded. I had made myself small so he could feel big. I had let them mistreat me because I thought family was about endurance. I thought that if I loved them enough, they would eventually see me. But they never saw me. They only saw what they could take from me. As the plane accelerated down the runway, pushing me back into the soft leather seat, I thought about that moment at the party. I thought about the sting of Julian's hand on my cheek, and I thought about the laugh that followed. That laugh was the most honest sound I had ever made. It wasn't the laugh of a victim. It was the laugh of a predator who realizes the prey has just walked into the trap. The plane lifted off, banking sharply over the Hudson River. I watched the city shrink below me until the Vantage Capitol Tower was just a needle in a haystack. They hit me because they thought I was weak. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my kindness was stupidity. They never understood that in the world of power, the person who speaks the least often holds the most cards. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like victory, cold, crisp, and incredibly sweet. Julian was right about one thing. It was a birthday I would never forget. It was the day I gave myself the greatest gift of all. I gave myself my life back. I opened my laptop and started typing my next move. Vantage Capital was going global, and I had a lot of work to do. But before I sign off, I want to ask you a question. A question for everyone who has ever been underestimated or taken for granted. What would you do if you found out your partner was using your hard-earned money to build a life with someone else? Would you forgive them? Or would you do what I did and burn their fantasy to the ground? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes it is just the calm before the storm.